record this. We are recording. Give Dr. Malone back the remote. Okay, excellent. Here we go. Welcome to the training today. Your speaker is the amazing Dr. Patty Malone, a leading authority in communication. She has a PhD in organizational communication and is a professor at Cal State Fullerton and UC Irvine. She has more than 25 years of experience in the field of communication in the following areas. She's been a corporate trainer, including for Dale Carnegie, a speaker, author, professor, and TV news anchor. She currently owns her own business, Clear Communication Institute Incorporated, and she helps companies increase productivity and profitability through communicating clearly. She specifically focuses on dysfunctional communication in organizations and has spent many years conducting research into costly communication mistakes in companies. Things like backstabbing and envy in the workplace, conflict, and the importance of clear communication. She is currently working on 2 books based upon her research: Communication is Money, the guide to workplace communication that impacts your bottom line, and Backstabbing and Envy in the Workplace, Taming the Toxic Environment. Today, Dr. Malone will focus on transforming destructive conflict into cooperation through clear communication. So here you go, Dr. Malone. Go ahead and click that screen again to regain control, and we should be good to go.
Okay, hopefully so.
There you go.
Okay, great. In 1992, Stevens Aviation and Southwest Airlines had a dispute over a slogan. Stevens was using the slogan "Plain Smart," and Southwest started using the slogan "Just Plain Smart." Well, rather than battle it out in court, the 2 CEOs decided to settle the score in an arm wrestling match. The event was held in Dallas, and it was called Malice in Dallas. It was held at the Sportatorium in front of thousands of spectators and all of the media. The winner would be the best 2 out of 3. They would get to keep the slogan, and the loser would have to pay $5,000 to the charity of the winner's choice. Well, Stevens won the best 2 out of 3, but they decided that Southwest had been such a good sport, and the event generated so much positive publicity for both airlines, they decided to let them keep their slogan too. They demonstrated they were being plain smart in the way they handled that conflict. Are you plain smart when it comes to handling conflict? Well, let's find out. Now, how does conflict typically start in the workplace? It's what I like to call the snowball effect. So what happens is it will typically start between 2 people. And a lot of times managers will say, well, we'll just let them work it out. They have a personality conflict or some other kind of an issue going on. We'll take more of a hands-off approach. But then what happens is what they're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg, because underneath the surface, those 2 people aren't just in a dispute with each other. The next thing you know, they're trying to get people to take sides. Pretty soon, teams are breaking apart, departments are going up against each other, and some people don't want anything to do with that. They don't want to be around that conflict and all that drama at all. They don't even want to go to work. So it's starting to spread and create a toxic environment. So what starts out as a snowball rolling down the hill pretty soon turns into an avalanche unless it's nipped in the bud. So these types of things cannot be ignored. What is the impact of this type of conflict in the workplace? Well, we see it every day in terms of damaged relationships, communication breakdowns, lowered morale. People are unhappy in coming to work. They don't want to be there. As a result, they have decreased job satisfaction and they've got lowered productivity. All of this is creating unhappy workers, and ultimately it impacts the customers and the bottom line. It's kind of like the parents. You know how we think that people don't know when there's some kind of a conflict going on? In the workplace, a lot of times we think, well, the customers don't know about that. But it's like the parents having a fight. The kids are upstairs and they think, well, they don't know, they're asleep. They don't know that we're having disagreements. You know what? The kids always know. And so do the customers. It's the kind of thing that you can't really hide. It impacts everybody. So how do we prevent all this from happening? By being prepared ahead of time and knowing how to avert it. So today we're going to talk about what causes conflict, what you can do about it, and when it's most likely to occur. So a few things to keep in mind. When we're in conflict, people tend to perceive that their opinion is fact, that they are innocent victims on the side of truth and justice, and other people's negative behavior, but not their own. You know how easy it is for us to do that? Typically, when we're in a conflict, we see everything else that the other person is doing, but we're not really looking at our own behavior or how we might be contributing to the conflict. So as we're going through this, we want to open up our minds and consider some other possible perspectives as we approach conflict, maybe different than what we've been doing in the past. So what are some behaviors in conflict? Actually take a few seconds, think about that. What types of behaviors come to mind? When you think about conflict, could be things like shouting, yelling, getting in somebody's face. So think about that, and I'm going to pop a few up here. Do those look familiar? Did we leave anything out? So these are just some of the typical behaviors that we think about when it comes to destructive conflict. There's not a single thing up there that's good or that's going to produce any kind of positive results. So these are the types of behaviors that we want to get away from. We want to transform this type of conflict into something that can have a positive result. Now, what happens too when we're exhibiting those behaviors or we're on the receiving end of those behaviors? A lot of times we're instantly going to go to blaming the other person, the other team, the other department, and that can show up in a couple of ways. It could either show up verbally, in which case we're actually confronting them, we're in their face, we're in an argument with them, or we're exploding at them, or the opposite could happen where we completely repress it. We're upset, we're angry, but we're not expressing it. We're just stuffing it down. And what usually happens when we stuff down feelings of anger and frustration over a period of time? That's right. Over a period of time, it's going to build up until it finally just explodes like a volcano. Now, the impact of those behaviors, the ones that we just looked at, on the yelling, the screaming, the backstabbing, as well as blaming people and either verbally confronting them or repressing those negative emotions, it stifles creativity and risk-taking. Members of the team then don't want to volunteer ideas because they're afraid somebody else will either steal their ideas or take credit for their ideas. They don't want to take risks. They're also afraid of maybe being made fun of or somebody bullying them or treating them like that's a stupid idea. Where'd you get that idea? That destroys trust over time. And trust is one of the most important elements in keeping a team together. It's basically the glue that holds a team together. And once that trust is damaged or destroyed, it's very challenging, it's very difficult to get it back. Now, I want to go through the circle of destructive conflict. This is what tends to happen in organizations. It's a perpetual cycle that once we get into it, it's really hard to pull out of it. But I'm going to show you how to pull out of it. But first, let's go through it. So think about this. There are certain trigger events that can set off conflicts. And actually, I want to see if any of you can type some in there and we can get a few responses from you. When you think about conflicts, either you've been involved in or that you've seen at work, what were some of the trigger events? And I'll throw out a few examples while you type in some responses, and we'll hear from a couple of you. For example, maybe you overhear a piece of rumor or a gossip about something that's upsetting to you. Or maybe there's a slight change in your job. Something has happened where your responsibilities have shifted and you're not happy about it. Or there was some kind of an unclear communication or breakdown in communication where something was misunderstood and that created a conflict. Maybe you're talking to somebody and they use a certain tone of voice. Maybe they're being sarcastic to you and you don't like that. So those are just a few examples of some things that can trigger. So what might be some other ones? So Lisa, do we have any other thoughts out there about some other ideas that might help trigger conflict?
Yeah, we do. So perceived slight or an insult, that someone has slighted them. So we've got a couple. So let me go through all of them. Okay. And then the manager not respecting the input from the employee's point of view. Sometimes other people undermining people, lack of respect. That's a big one.
It is.
Yeah. So those are some of those that came out just right now.
Okay, great. So that's something that you could tend to think about. Like, what are some of the things that trigger me? What are some of the things that really get me going? Now, what happens after the trigger event occurs is we have immediate thoughts and interpretation about what that meant. And they usually go something like this: he just insulted me. Or how dare she talk to me that way? Or boy, is that stupid. Or what a jerk. I can't stand him. Please get me away from this B, fill in the blank, right? So we start having those instant, really negative thoughts and interpretation, and all of it is negative. And then we tend to blame the other person for that. And then out of those thoughts and interpretation, we have our own reactions. And the first one is emotion. And this happens so fast. The trigger event, our thought and interpretation, and then our instant emotion. And if we're having those thoughts and interpretations that go along the lines of, what a jerk, or how dare he talk to me like that, or what an insult, what are some of the emotions that we are likely to feel? Anger, frustration, hurt, resentment, disappointment. And out of that comes a change in attitude. Now, maybe we were okay with this person before. Maybe we were at least neutral. Maybe we even liked them or got along with them. But now we're feeling suspicious, mistrustful, guarded, maybe hostile. We don't trust them. So it's affecting our attitude. And in worst cases, it can actually affect us physically, especially if this is an ongoing conflict, if this is an ongoing thing that we can't seem to escape from. In that case, we might find ourselves with insomnia, headaches, stomach aches, high blood pressure, and of course, at the very worst case scenarios, we can actually make ourselves really sick. We can really get serious diseases from it. Now, out of our emotional reactions and our attitudes come the own actions that we take. What are our responses? What do we do in response? Now, in some cases, we may get right back in that person's face. We may go toe-to-toe with them and just start arguing right back. If they insult me, I'm going to insult them back. If they attack me, I'm going to go on the defensive. Or we may have another reaction where we completely want to disengage with that person. We want to totally avoid them. We don't want to be around them. But guess what? We still have to work with them. And there they are every day. We still have to deal with them. Or maybe we go and start complaining to everybody else. There's a lot of different ways that we could react to this. Then that has long-term impact and results. It definitely impacts the relationship, and it's seriously damaging it, and it may even completely destroy the relationship at this point. So then what happens, once we've reached that point, then we start scanning the horizon for further evidence of how they're a jerk, or how they wronged me, or how they insulted me, and then the next trigger event happens, and the cycle starts again. And it goes around and around and around. Now, yeah, Lisa?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Malone. There were a couple more great ones that came in.
Okay,
when we talked about the thoughts and interpretation, the trigger event. One was that a suggestion is dismissed without consideration. And then the other, which I think is really important, perceived lack of care by management. So those two.
Yes, when people feel unappreciated, unrecognized, absolutely. That's definitely a huge thing. Okay, so now that we're looking at this circle of destructive conflict, how can it be constructive? Let's look at the flip side. If we're having a constructive conflict as opposed to this destructive type. So some ways that conflict can be constructive is it actually promotes a variety of perspectives. So there is nothing wrong with people having a healthy argument when trying to come to a decision about something, or trying to solve a problem, or trying to come up with a new idea. It's kind of like brainstorming, where people can debate each other's ideas, build on each other's ideas, but you're getting a lot more perspectives if you're doing that. That in turn can stimulate further thought and some innovative ideas. Instead of, oh, we're just going to do it this way because this is how we've always done it, we're actually coming up with new ideas because of the variety of perspectives from healthy debate and argument. This, in turn, can develop really creative solutions from thinking outside of the box. And in this way, it maximizes gains for all so that everybody comes out a winner, just like in that example of the airlines at the beginning. Instead of the win-lose model, which is so typical in conflict, like I win and you lose, which actually ends up lose-lose because everybody ends up losing when you have that kind of a conflict. This does the opposite. It makes everybody come out a winner. This strengthens trust and relationships. And this is really important. In a conflict, it's never neutral when it's over. Either you've come through it on a positive side like this, where you have strengthened the trust and your relationship, or it's had the opposite effect in that destructive conflict where it's really damaged the relationship and possibly permanently destroyed it. Now, how do we get here, over here, to this constructive conflict from here? Now, take a look at this circle and think about it. What do we have control over in this circle? Can we control the trigger event? Nope. We're programmed for that. Something happens, we can't control whether they're going to do or not do this trigger event. Out of that comes our thoughts and interpretations. And actually, this is where everything starts shifting, because our reactions, the emotions and attitudes, as well as the actions we take in response, come out of our thoughts and interpretation. Those two follow. Now, they may follow very quickly, but they come from our thoughts and interpretation, how we frame things. So what we want to do to break out of the circle is stop it right here at the very beginning. The trigger event happens, we're instantly going into, what a jerk, I can't stand him, how dare he, blah, blah, blah. So what we need to do is we need to ask ourselves, what are our thoughts? What am I saying to myself? How am I interpreting events? This is a major thing, is the things that we're saying to ourselves. Now, you may be aware, just think about it, when you're going through the course of your daily life, we've got this nonstop stream of thoughts, like this voice inside of our head. It's always commenting on everything that's happening around us. People, it's always judging and assessing everything that's happening. Now, some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Some of you might be saying, what voice? That one, the one that just asked that question. What voice? It's constantly going, and we need to be aware of it, especially when it starts going into those negative thoughts about what a jerk and how dare he, etc. So what we want to do instead is first consider negative versus positive self-talk, and just consider the possibility that there may be another way to interpret this. Maybe they're not out to get you. Instead of saying to ourselves, oh, she's out to get me, maybe we might consider, maybe she's just having a bad day, or he's a jerk. Maybe he didn't mean anything by that. Or we might want to ask ourselves the question, how can I get to know him or her better so I can find out what's going on with them? Also, we might want to consider the possibility that we don't know what's going on in their personal lives. I'm not suggesting that it's ever okay to come into work and be a jerk or be disrespectful to somebody or start up negative conflicts. However, there are some things going on in people's personal lives that can affect the way they're interacting. All I'm suggesting is that we just consider this possibility, and rather than going instantly to the worst case scenario interpretation of what's going on and why it's happening, consider something else might be happening. Maybe that person is in the middle of a really messy divorce. Or here's an example that I really, really like. Stephen Covey, best-selling author, 7 Habits of Effective Managers, and a whole series of books like that, amazing bestseller. Before he became famous and a well-known author, he tells the story, he was riding on a subway, and there was a man there with 3 kids, and these 3 kids were just going crazy. They were running up and down the aisles, they were swinging from the bars, they were screaming, and Stephen Covey was sitting there getting angrier and angrier, ready to really just jump on this guy because of his kids' behaviors. Why isn't this guy controlling these kids? What is wrong with him? So finally he reached the point where he thought, I have to say something. I can't let this go on any longer. So he said, hey man, what's wrong with you? Can't you get control of these kids? And the guy looks at him and he says, you're right. I guess I really should. But the thing is, we just came from the hospital where their mother just died, and they don't know how to deal with it yet, and frankly, neither do I. What are you going to do? We just don't know what's going on with other people. Now, something I would like to suggest at this point is I would actually, after we get off of the webinar, I would take a piece of paper, think back on a recent conflict that you've had, What were you thinking about right before it started? And when you were just starting to get into it, what were you saying to yourself? Were you saying things like, he's a jerk, or I can't stand him, or she's a B? I mean, what was it? What was the thing that you were saying? I would actually write that down and then consider what might be another possible interpretation and write that down. Maybe they have no idea the negative impact what they just said made on me, or they didn't mean anything by that. He's having a bad day. Something along those lines. I would actually make an exercise out of it. Just take a couple of minutes and do that. And then start becoming aware of this whenever you're getting into a conflict in the future. When you start heading in that direction, do this. Look and say, what am I saying to myself right now? Now, another thing about this, remember that saying when we were little kids, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Is that true? No, that is not true. Words are powerful. What people say to us, what we say to other people, and what we say to ourselves makes a major impact. And another thing about this, if we can start shifting our talk out of that negative stuff, that does a huge amount for us towards our own peace of mind and being able to deal with this other person. If we can disconnect ourselves from it and not take everything so personally, that can make a huge impact in how we frame it, the whole context of things. Then we can start changing how we communicate with them and transform the relationship. Now, a lot of times what we want to do with a conflict, we're instantly thinking, how can I make this person stop doing this? How can I make them stop acting that way? Well, we really can't when we're trying to force something like that, but we have absolute control over how we react to it, what we say to ourselves, and in turn, what we say to them, how we respond to them. Now, we can make a slight change in our communication that can totally transform the relationship, and it could completely shift the way that they interact with you. So that's where you want to start from. If you want them to start behaving differently toward you, rather than I'm going to force them to change, or I'm going to show them, or any of those types of things, start with shifting how you're framing it, and at least give them a break to start out with. See if you can get a better idea about their perspective and how they look at it. There's a great quote from Maxwell Maltz. We're hurt and injured emotionally, not so much by others and what they say or don't say, but by our own attitudes and our own responses. Now, the next piece of this was just what we're saying to ourselves. Now, what about when we're communicating with them? What are we saying to them? So one thing that can really shift things around is to use responsible language. By that, we mean taking ownership for your emotions and not instantly blaming it on someone else. You know how sometimes we're angry and we can say things like, you make me so mad, or you're always late, or you do this, you do that, blah, 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 blah. If we can stay away from that you, because the minute we say you, it's accusatory, and that puts the other person on the defensive, and there you go, right into the middle of a conflict, attack, defend, attack, defend. So we want to take responsibility for our own emotions. Instead of you make me so mad, I feel disrespected when someone interrupts me when I'm talking. So we're talking about our own feelings. We're being responsible for them. We're not blaming somebody else. And we're taking the you out of it. We're taking the blaming away from it. We're not putting that person on the defensive. Or it could be things like the meeting, you're late. Or you could say something instead like, I thought the meeting started at 10. Or you didn't turn those papers in this morning. I thought the papers were going to be turned in at 10. I mean, you can begin things like that. Start by talking about I. And if you have feelings about it, own them yourself and don't blame them on the other person. And this, again, can make a huge shift in the way you're communicating with people. And again, as part of that activity I just mentioned, that exercise, when you get off to think in terms of what you've said in the past that's negative and what you might say to yourself instead that's positive, I would also do this. Think about in the past when you've had a conflict and you started sentences with you. You did this, you did that, and see if you can shift it. How might you shift that around to start the sentence with I? I feel this when this happens. And another piece of that, we want to avoid those words always and never. You always do this, you never do that. It's not true. And then we're pulling up things from the past. we're not focusing on the issue at hand. If you always and you never, then we're looking over a series of incidents, and then that's pulling a bunch of other stuff into it. So we want to stay away from that as well. Now, here's another piece of this. We want to ask ourselves this question: what is our role? Now, we don't like to ask ourselves that question because we want to think it's all them. But we've got to ask ourselves, is there anything that I am doing or not doing that is actually encouraging this conflict to continue? Or am I allowing this conflict to continue? Am I doing anything to try and resolve it? Or am I actually pushing that person's buttons? Am I creating the trigger event? Am I somehow enjoying that in some weird way to perpetuate this? So that's something that we want to consider. Now, this is what typically happens in a conflict, what I like to call the knee-jerk reaction. It's that trigger and emotional response, trigger, emotional response, and it happens so fast. That's why I call it knee-jerk. It's like when the physician hits your knee with that little hammer and your leg automatically jerks, right? You've got no control over it. There's no thought to it. It just happens. Well, in conflict, it's pretty much the same way. Somebody pushes our button, the trigger event, and we automatically react. And it could be maybe they yell, I yell. They attack, I get defensive. But literally, we're like robots. They push our button and we react. We do the same thing. Or we're like puppets, marionettes. They pull our strings and we do the dance. And also when we're doing that, when we're giving those knee-jerk reactions with no thought whatsoever, we're giving all of our power away. We're giving them total control over us. We're just reacting. We're not taking control of the situation at all. So that's something that we want to avoid. What we want to do instead is choose a response. Yes, this can be challenging, especially the first few times that you do it, because you're in the midst of this thing and emotions are running high. But being able to literally take a step back from that and say to yourself, I may be working with this person for a long time to come. What can I do to make this have a better outcome and not escalate it? Because if I do that knee-jerk reaction, this thing is just going to escalate and spin out of control. So let me give you a personal example. There's somebody that I was working with a number of years ago, and we were working on a number of different projects together. And I started feeling like something wasn't quite right. I wasn't exactly sure what it was, but it seemed like she was pulling back from me. Well, one day I get this email from her, a really lengthy email, single-spaced, totally attacking me. All the things that I did wrong and all the ways that I am as a person, like a total character attack. Well, my knee-jerk automatic reaction would typically have been for me to get right back on that computer and be like, what about you? What do you mean me? What about you? Instantly defensive, because that is my knee-jerk reaction. Somebody attacks, I go on the defensive. But I didn't do that. I thought, you know what? I need to sit with this because we've been working together for a while and likely we're going to be working together for quite a while to come. I'm not going to go into that because it's going to escalate it. We're going to never speak to each other again. It's going to be a disaster. So I slept on it, and I slept on it not just for 24 hours, but actually for 48 before I responded. And I sent back a very simple email, and it was true. I said, I had no idea you felt that way. When would you like to talk? So we set up a meeting, and I went in with the idea, I'm really going to listen to her and what she's got to say, and I'm not going to go into that automatic knee-jerk trigger defense mechanism that I usually do. So we got into the meeting, and I just asked her, I said, so what is it that's going on? Tell me about it. So she started talking about things like how I communicate, I'm too blunt, blah, blah, blah. And I was really listening to her, and I thought, I can actually see how somebody could think that, because I'm used to communicating very directly, but that doesn't always work with everybody. We all have different communication styles. So I said, and this was not manipulative. I did not have an agenda. I genuinely wanted to get her point of view. I said, you know what? You're right. And thank you for pointing that out to me, because I don't want to be that way. And you're right. Sometimes I am too blunt and I am too direct. So I appreciate your telling me that. She was kind of stunned because I think she came in kind of, dukes up, expecting that we were going to get into a fight. And I just was not responding. Now, it's really hard to be in a conflict with somebody if the other person's not going to participate in that conflict with you. And I was just not going to. So I agreed with her, and she mentioned one or two more things, and I agreed with that as well. And again, this was not manipulative. It was genuinely looking for a solution, trying to hear her perspective. Well, the conversation was over very quickly. There was nothing to be in conflict about because I wasn't chomping at the bit, I wasn't biting the bait. And as a result of that, we not only continued to work together, we actually became really good friends too. So that made a huge impact. That's the difference that the way you communicate can make in terms of what you're saying to yourself, choosing response instead of going into that knee-jerk automatic trigger reaction. It can make a huge impact. So before we get into this next piece, I've got some specific tips. I wanted to see if anybody has any questions right now up to this point. And I know I'm just throwing that out there. Maybe I should have thrown that out a few minutes ago to give you a chance to think about it.
Yeah, so while we're waiting for people to respond or to think through how they would respond in a situation, possibly, two things really stood out from what you just talked about, and I think they're key, Dr. Malone. The first one is that we don't control the trigger event, but we absolutely can control our response to it, and that has a very strong likelihood to affect the outcome. It may not completely change everything, but it can definitely affect the outcome, and that's so powerful. And then what you just said, which I love, is if you don't participate in a conflict, then it leaves them with nothing to continue with. I love that. You can opt out of any conflict you would like. It is your choice.
Exactly.
All right, let's see. Anybody have anything they want to say about the last part of the training? Anything that comes to mind for you in dealing with people? Have you ever felt like someone was pushing your buttons maybe? Okay, Trisha has a great one. Do you have any suggestions for communicating with a person who is on the autism spectrum but high functioning and may not be able to communicate about their feelings?
That's a little bit more challenging because that's not really my area of expertise. That's getting into other types of issues that are medical. And that's actually different when you're dealing with people who have, and I'm not saying autism is psychological problems, but if you're dealing with people that have challenges like that they're not on the same plane as most people, that I don't know about. So somebody who's more into psychology or medicine would probably have a better answer to that. I'm assuming they're high functioning autism based on what you said, but I would just consider that fact. I would remind myself of that. If there's some kind of a problem coming up with them or some kind of a conflict, I would remind myself that they don't have a whole lot of control over the way they're being, because mentally that's the way they're wired. It's not something where they can suddenly make a choice. Oh, I'm not going to be this way anymore, whereas the rest of us can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have another one that's a really a good comment from Nancy. She says, while these are great thoughts and ideas, it's hard to stay positive when working on a daily basis with others who don't seem receptive to positivity. So how do you handle that, Dr. Malone, when you have you have all the best intentions, but the environment around you may not be receptive to what you want to achieve?
Yeah, that sounds like it's reached the point where it's created that toxic environment, which is what we want to try to prevent. But the way I would approach it, it's not like this Pollyanna, put on a happy face, let's be positive, because that doesn't work. That's not genuine, and that can actually aggravate people even more, especially if people are upset about something and then somebody else is being all smiley and happy face. That actually makes things worse by doing that. So what I would do is I would make sure that I'm being genuine. I would actually start asking people questions, trying to find out what's genuinely going on with them, because a lot of times people are like that. They've disengaged, or they're not really participating, or they're not that positive. A lot of times people will do that because they feel like they're not being heard, that nobody's listening to them, or that they've been disrespected in some way, or something unfair has happened, like somebody else has gotten a promotion or a job that they were expecting, or something along those lines. But usually if we can get to know them better on a personal level, that can make a big difference in transforming the relationship and shifting things around, even if it's one at a time, even if you can just start with one person at a time. When you look at it like, oh my gosh, I'm dealing with all these negative people and I have to deal with this every day, that can be really overwhelming. I would select a couple of people that I think are the most likely to come around and start talking to them and just try to make an effort to get to know them, to understand who they are, where they're coming from, why they feel the way they do. And it's good to ask questions, but I would be careful how you phrase that questions, because you don't want to put people on the defensive. Like, well, why did you say that? Or why do you think that? You know, you want to be careful with stuff like that. You really just want to come with the intention of getting to know them as a fellow person, a fellow coworker, a little bit better than you do now, and start from there.
Good, good. Thanks, Tricia and Nancy, for your feedback. And so I guess, oh, we have another one. What are some tips on how to give tough feedback to those you supervise? Ah, that's a great one, Dr. Malone.
And you know what? I've got an entire speaking and training on that topic alone, how to give both positive and negative feedback, as well as how to receive it. But a general guideline for giving feedback, either way, is to give it in the moment. A lot of times people wait until a performance review or, you know, certain structured times. It really needs to be given in the moment. And then also check for communication to make sure that they understood what was said. And if it's negative, you want to make sure that you're not doing it in an accusatory way, in a nasty way. I mean, you can give negative feedback, but you can do it in such a way that you can get them on board for producing the results that you're looking for. Maybe give some examples of other ways that they could have handled a specific situation. And you also want to be very specific. Talk about a specific thing that happened, a specific incident, and also try and stay away from interpretations and opinions, but stick more to the facts. You know, like, for example, if a customer starts yelling at them and they start yelling back, that's a fact, right? It's observable. You could see it. Other people could see it. You want to stick to that, not interpreting that they're tired of their job because they got angry or that they're not a team player, etc. So try to stick to the facts and give it in the moment. Those are the quick answer for what you just asked.
Mm-hmm.
All right, maybe we should move on to the tips.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. One thing is choose your battles. You cannot win every argument. You cannot win every conflict. And honestly, the vast majority of them really aren't worth it. So if it's something that's really important to you, then that's one thing. But if it's not, if you're just arguing because you want to be right or you want to prove your point, or you just don't want to give it up, that's really not worth it. Those are the ones that you really need to let go. Just let them have it. It's not that important. Here's a big one. You want to focus on the actual issue that's at hand. And a lot of times people will start pulling in other issues or things from the past or personality characteristics. And none of that has to do with what the conflict is actually about. Really need to stick to the issue and approach it like you're trying to find a solution that's workable for both of you. You do want to have concern for the other person's feelings as a fellow human being, as a fellow coworker, fellow team member. And the more that you have concern for the other person's feelings, they'll realize it. They will know that you do appreciate them and that you're not trying to take them for granted or trying to take advantage of a situation. But just be genuinely concerned about how the other person feels and realize that in their mind, whether you think it's justified or not, in their mind it is, and at least hear them out. Keep the relationship friendly. Now, that doesn't mean we're always going to agree on everything, but also that doesn't mean that we have to get into a situation where it's nasty between us. Because you're probably going to be working with that person for a long time to come, we want to keep the relationship as friendly as we can. Agree to disagree, or don't just get lost in that one particular conflict. Do your best to set that aside and still see them as a fellow human being. Treat them with respect. And really listen. Like I mentioned, people feel that they're not being heard. And when they feel they're not being heard, they feel they're not being appreciated. They're not being respected. People aren't taking them seriously. They're not listening to their ideas. So really listen. And especially in a conflict, that's when they really feel they need to be heard. And that's often why people start raising their voices and start talking over each other, start arguing and screaming, because if you're not listening to them, I'm going to force you to listen to me. So want to really listen. And when you're really listening, they know, they do know, and they will start to calm down if they get that you're really listening to them. Also, you don't want to get defensive or react to outbursts. You don't want to get sucked into somebody else's drama. And yes, again, this is challenging if they're flipping out and going crazy, for you to remain calm and not get right back at them. Because again, that's one of those knee-jerk trigger responses that we often have. Now, here's an example I'm going to give that it's not only like not going on the defensive, reacting to outbursts, but also being respectful and keeping relationships friendly. So here's another example that happened to me. This was a number of years ago, and I was in a copy room, and I was making copies on a copy machine, and there was another copy machine next to me, and somebody was making copies. I don't know who. I didn't see anybody standing there, but there was copies going over there too. So a person walks into the copy room, and this person is known for being kind of a loose cannon and always starting arguments and meetings and creating problems between other people. So she automatically assumed that I was using that copy machine too. And she started yelling at me, "Patty, you can't use two copy machines at the same time, blah, blah, blah," like screaming at me. And I thought, I am not going to get sucked into this. I'm not going to react like that. So I just turned and looked at her. I said, "No, I'm not using it." Went about my business and left. Well, then later on, I saw her over by the elevators, and she said, yeah, I know I was wrong. I yelled at you, and a bunch of people jumped on me as soon as you left because that wasn't you that was doing that. And I started thinking about her, and I thought, she does have this volatile personality, but how can I get along better with her so that I'm not the target of any of this stuff anymore? So I thought, well, one thing, keep the relationship friendly and be respectful of people, even ask their advice. So there was something she was really good at and that she was known for, and it was something that I happened to be working on at the same time. So I went and asked her advice about it. Like, how do I do this? I know you've done this and you've already accomplished this. What do I need to do to be good at this? Well, she was more than happy because I was asking her opinion and her advice. She was happy to tell me, and it was actually good advice because she was good at it. So I used it and I moved on too. I was able to successfully complete the project. But that made a big difference. And then after that point, again, she never engaged me. That was a long time ago. She never engaged me in any other kinds of conflict. So that just goes to show, if you can show people respect, look for something that they're doing right, trying to show appreciation, even if they do seem like they're difficult people or loose cannons. And then follow up. This is another important thing that a lot of times we really don't even think about. But after a conflict, sometimes it might be interrupted. Maybe we're done in our minds, okay, I'm done with that. The other person might not be. Maybe you've got a deadline, you're in the middle of a conflict, or maybe somebody else walks into the room, something disrupts it. You go about your business, oh, good, I'm glad that's over with. You don't know what that other person is thinking. You want to make sure that everything is okay. So the next day or later that day, just ask them, hey, are we okay with what we were talking about earlier? Is there anything else we still need to discuss, or is it okay? Then they can say either, no, we're fine, or, well, there's still this one piece that I don't get. Then you can go ahead and talk about that and wrap things up and get some closure. Don't just leave it out there, because that's when they start scanning the horizon for further evidence of, oh, he's a jerk, she's a jerk, and then they'll find the next trigger event. So we want to make sure that we follow up so that we can get some closure. Now, when is conflict most likely to occur? There are certain times, it can occur anytime, right? We all know that. We've all seen that and probably experienced it. But there are certain times when it's more likely to surface. One is whenever there's any kind of a change in the organization. It may be bringing in new management, it may be a merger, it may be layoffs, it may be introducing new technology, changing structure, policy changes, anything like that. People can get very confused, or they misunderstand something, or they're not fully informed, and then arguments break out, debates, and people want to stand firm to protect their turf and their territory. So that's one time when it's likely to surface. Another is, I've got difficult people. Believe it or not, it could be one difficult person. One difficult person, if they are not dealt with, that can spread like wildfire. They can create a toxic environment. And that, again, in itself is another whole topic that I deal with, is how do you deal with difficult people? Building teams. Whenever you're adding people or transferring people around, you're changing the dynamics of a team. Anytime that's happening, again, there's a great potential for misunderstanding and conflict. You're changing the dynamics. There's different personalities meshing together. So that's another time to watch out for conflict. And especially these days, communicating across anything, communicating across teams, departments, generations, cultures, all kinds of potential for breakdowns. Generations, different ways of communicating, different values. It's so easy to misunderstand and misinterpret between and across generations. Same thing with cultures. A lot of different cultural differences have different meanings, both verbally and non-verbally. Again, very easy to misinterpret and misunderstand. And across teams these days, with the silos in different companies and organizations, teams may be great within themselves, but lack communication across teams. That's another really big, important time to be conscious of this. Now, in just a minute, so you can be thinking about these now, I'm going to open up for questions here again in just a minute. But before we do that, I wanted to just summarize a little bit what we've been talking about today. We've been focusing on what causes conflict, what you can do about it, when it's most likely to occur. We're also thinking in terms of, what are we saying to ourselves, and what are we saying when we're interacting with other people? We can transform the way we conduct conflict. We can take our power back in conflict, but we don't need to be adversarial to do it. And there's a quote that I want to leave you with before we open up for questions and then wrap up. And that's, in the organization or in a company, conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional.
Oh, I like that, Dr. Malone.
Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention too. Another time that conflict might surface, and you've probably seen this, is in meetings, right? People roll their eyes, or they start giving nonverbals, or they're not participating. I did want to mention that our next free webinar that we're going to be doing is going to be on conducting powerful and engaging meetings. So that's going to be really great. That one will be next month, and we'll have that one for you next time around. So, okay.
That's
so
great.
What questions do we have?
Okay, so Nancy gave some feedback. She said, I assume when the client shows frustration towards a response, still assure them that they're heard, no matter what the response is. And if the next response is negative, no further response is necessary, correct? Choose the battle, i.e. we cannot control others' responses?
Okay, so you're talking about a client, if there's some kind of a conflict, and you choose, I'm sorry, Lisa, can you read that again?
Sure. So there's a conflict with a client, and you assure them that they're heard. And if they come back still with a negative response,
okay,
are you to continue to engage, or how do you handle that? Because the question was, choose the battle, because you cannot control what other people are going to say or do.
Yeah, well, you assure them that they've been heard. If they're still reacting like that, they may not feel that they've been heard. Even if you did hear them and you're assuring them, I wouldn't that quickly just back off of them, especially when it's a client. I would take a little bit more time I would ask them a few more questions to see if you can really find out, where they're coming from, and also ask them, what would they like for you to do? How can I help you with this? What would you like for me to do? And if it's something that you can't do, that's like out of your realm, or that's a different area, then I would make sure to put them in contact with the person who actually could do something about it. I wouldn't leave it just out there, and I wouldn't just cut them off either. Actually, when it comes to cutting people off, that's really like a last resort, when you really feel like you've done everything that you can in terms of listening to them and trying to help them, trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. At some point, yes, you do need to set boundaries, and you certainly don't want somebody to be abusive to you. If they're treating you with disrespect, then yes, you do want to, that's when you want to cut it off and back off from that.
One of the things that you talk about, and I know that you're going to go into meetings on the next free training that you're doing, and that's so important, because a lot of miscommunication happens during these short, isolated periods of time. People aren't engaged, they don't hear. But one of the things that you had mentioned was that everybody wants to feel like they're being heard. So can you recap some of maybe the actual behaviors we can model to help people connect with you and know that you're truly listening? Like, what are those? Are there any kind of cues that we can give to the other person that we're listening, or anything that we can say that will get their brain to go, oh, they're really listening to me?
Okay, this is going to sound like probably a strange answer. I would be careful of that, because then it's like you're focusing on you. What am I doing? Then you're not focusing on them. You're not really listening, because you're thinking, oh, maybe I should smile, maybe I should nod, maybe I should make sure that I'm making enough eye contact. That's really focusing in the wrong place. If you're really getting out of your own head and putting your focus over there on them, you're shifting over there to them, they'll feel it. It may take a while. I have an example. Actually, I mentioned it in the last webinar, but I'll quickly mention it here too, for those of you who weren't here. But there was somebody that I knew a long time ago who never stopped talking. And she cornered me one day. She was talking and talking and talking. And I thought, instead of planning an escape route and being in my head of how can I get rid of her, I'm really going to listen to her. So I did. And it took a while. Like for 5 minutes, she was talking on, and it wasn't registering that I was listening. I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything, but I was really listening. I was really getting who she was, where she was coming from, and why she felt that way. 10 minutes in, probably between 10 and 15 minutes in, she finally realized that somebody, maybe for the first time, was actually listening to her. And then she stopped. And then after that, she did not corner me like that again. But it wasn't anything like, I was not monitoring myself. Like, do I have the right facial expression? Am I saying at the right moment? Because I think that's focusing on the wrong thing. You really need to get out of your head and shift over and focus completely on the other person.
Good. I like that. Let's see. Okay, here's some feedback. It's harder to give constructive feedback when the person being consistently disrespectful is your boss. There's fear of repercussion and retaliation. Please give tips for this situation.
Okay, well, if it's the boss that you want to give negative feedback to, there's actually nothing wrong with doing that. It's how you do it. It's the tone of voice. And I might do things like even ask some questions like, do you need some help with this? Or do you need some assistance with this? Or, ask some questions like that, because again, you don't know what's going on with them and their home life. You just want to make sure you don't come across like you're attacking them, that where you're really coming from is a sincere, genuine interest in helping improve the situation. Or maybe you've got some ideas, some suggestions. You could present it like that. Like, hey, I've been thinking about this particular situation. I've got some ideas that I wanted to run by you and just see what you think. And then make some suggestions, what you're thinking that would be improving the situation, without making it personal, like, hey, you talk to me in this tone of voice and I find it offensive. You want to stay away from like accusatory statements like that. I would present it that way.
One of the things that comes to mind too, that in this situation in particular, if there seems to be tension in the relationship and you want to get clarity so that you can move forward, and you feel like asking for feedback or trying to get them in a better mood is difficult, sometimes you can reiterate the question or the need. And the illustration I have for this is, if they come across as being disrespectful, then you can come back in a pleasant way and say, I don't think I'm clear. I feel like there are some unspoken needs that you still have with this. How can I get to the next level? Or how can I help with this? Or can you help me understand? I really value your opinion. And sometimes that helps them let down the guard. What do you think about that, Dr. Malone?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a good approach. When you're asking non-threatening questions, non-attacking questions, and you're also offering your help. You're making it clear that you're wanting to clear up whatever it is that's going on there. If there's any help that's needed in that situation, that you want to provide it. You're really looking like, am I missing something in the situation? Is there something I can do to help improve things? I think that's a very good approach.
Okay, great. Well, anybody else have any feedback or question that we can address for you right now live? If you do, please put it in the chat or in the Q&A. And as we continue to wrap this up, I just want to thank you again, Dr. Malone, for your time today, and thank everybody who's been a part of the program. We will be sending this to you, like I said, either late Friday or early Monday so that you have it to review. And then as always, Dr. Malone has put her contact information on the slide. If you have any questions, if you are a team leader, a manager, and you want to connect with her to maybe come in and do some training in your team, feel free to do that, because it's really important in our workplaces to make sure that we're heard, that we're understood, and that we're creating the best environment to accomplish our goals. We have two more feedback bits here as we complete this, Dr. Malone. How do you let someone know that an action they have taken has made you feel disrespected? Maybe some people just don't get it when they do certain things, right?
Right. Yeah, you could ask a question about it. You could say something like, this actually, you could just be straightforward and say, when this occurred, I felt disrespected. And then stop talking. Don't say anything else. Don't start really explaining it. Just see what they say. Give them an opportunity, because you would be surprised how many people are really oblivious to the impact that they have when they say or do certain things. A lot of the times they're kind of shocked when they hear that. They really had no idea that they were doing or saying something that was hurting you or offensive to you. There's nothing wrong with being direct, but again, just do it in a way where you're not sounding like you're attacking them. You might even say, I'm a little confused. When this happened, I felt disrespected. Am I missing something? Something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. I think that's good. Another phrase that I've heard people use before is, I think I misunderstood your intention, the way this came across. I'm sure you didn't mean it to come out this way.
Yeah, and that's good too.
Yeah. And then one final thing here, back to a client having conflict with a company. If a client sends a negative tone to email using all caps and bold to try to get their point across, what is the recommended way to respond to this type of communication?
I would try and respond in a normal way. In other words, don't respond in all caps too. If they have some direct complaint, I would try and decipher what that was out of what they're saying and respond to that in a normal manner. That's so inappropriate. And actually, I think I'm going to address a little bit about appropriate and inappropriate emails when we're talking about the meetings. I'm going to bring up a little bit of that as well. It's never a good idea to put something in an email or in capital like that, anything that could produce a negative emotion in the recipient. That's not an effective way to communicate. So I would still try, don't get engaged, don't get sucked into their drama, don't respond in capitals, or don't respond in an angry tone. Try and decipher what their main concern is, and just respond to that in a normal manner.
Right. Brenda Kinnerly asked, does the session qualify for PDUs? I know we had talked about that, Dr. Malone. Is there something that we can send to see if they can submit it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because other sessions I've done that are similar to this, both in person and webinars, always have counted for that. But I'm not the one who's ever taken care of it. Usually it's been the other person. I've been like a guest speaker or something like that has taken care of that. And it should qualify, but unfortunately, I don't really know enough about how that works.
Mm-hmm. Well, Brenda, I think a great thing would be to find out who you would need to turn that into, and we'll see if maybe producing the transcript as well as proof that you were here, see if that can help. We can try to do that. And thank you for your feedback that it was a good session.
Thank you. Yes.
All right, Dr. Malone, thank you so much. And again, everybody, thank you for being here with us. You'll get the replay, and you'll also get information about the June training about conducting effective meetings. It's going to be a great program. And again, Dr. Malone will be available for live Q&A and supporting you to make your meetings great. So thanks so much, everybody. We will see you in June.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.